$1,200 to wreck a Mercedes? I didn't even hesitate. That luxury car belonging to the president of the HOA had driven over my lawn for the 14th time in a single summer. Even worse, I was the one receiving threats of fines for so-called lawn neglect. But that 15th time, it turned into a lesson she wouldn't soon forget. Have you ever had to deal with a nightmare neighbor? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious to hear your experiences. I never thought I'd build a fully legal car trap beneath my front yard, but when you're up against a high-ranking Karen, sometimes you need a whole arsenal of backup plans. Welcome to the story of how I turned a regular lawn into the ultimate defense mechanism against entitled drivers. 6 months ago, I finally achieved what many dream of: owning my own home. After years of grinding away at my remote job as a software engineer and saving everything I could, I bought a cozy little house on a corner lot in a quiet Florida suburb. The neighborhood was charming, filled with leafy streets and tidy homes. Those first weekends were a blur of home improvement projects. I poured my energy into fixing up the place, especially the front yard. My late father and I had spent hours gardening when I was younger, and taking care of my lawn became a way to stay connected to those memories. Every patch of grass I planted felt like a tribute to him. Sure, the house had its imperfections. The previous owners had neglected a few things, and the corner lot meant more foot traffic and cars passing by. But it was mine. I'd spend my evenings after work getting my hands dirty trimming the edges, installing solar lights, and planting native Florida flowers that could survive the heat and humidity. Dad used to say the way you care for the outside of your home shows the kind of person you are. I wanted mine to show pride, effort, and respect. That lawn became a personal project, a vibrant, living canvas that I worked on every day. People in the neighborhood started to notice. A few even stopped to compliment my work. "The place hasn't looked this good in years," said one older gentleman walking his corgi. "Nice to see someone caring for their yard again." Little moments like that made me feel like I belonged. The first few weeks were smooth. Neighbors smiled and waved. Everything felt peaceful. Then I met Deborah Thompson. One Saturday morning, Deborah appeared at my door with a forced smile, a basket of muffins, and a binder titled Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association Guidelines. She introduced herself as both the HOA president and a longtime real estate agent in the area. "You should join us for the neighborhood barbecue next weekend." She's not so much inviting as demanding. It's where all the important community ties are made. When I mentioned a work deadline, her smile tightened, just a bit. "Well, I'm sure you'll learn to prioritize community events. We all need to contribute." After she left, I flipped through the binder. 34 pages of nitpicky regulations, including mailbox standards and a believe it or not the maximum allowed height for garden gnomes, 12 inches. If you're curious, something about Deborah felt off. Her perfectly styled look, the subtle pressure in her tone, it reminded me of salespeople who smile too much while trying to close a deal, the kind that hides a hard edge under all that sugary charm. The trouble started the following week. Deborah hosted a small get-together for a few home members. Cars lined the street, including her pristine white Mercedes. After the meeting, I watched from my office window as she climbed into her car and, instead of backing out and turning properly, cut straight across my lawn. Tire tracks sliced through my freshly planted grass, leaving behind torn-up dirt and brown ruts. I approached her the next day, keeping it polite. "Hey Deborah, someone drove over my lawn yesterday. It messed up some of the new grass I just planted." She didn't even blink. "Oh, that was probably me," she said casually. "Everyone uses that shortcut." The old owners never minded. Then came the wave of dismissal. "It's just part of living on a corner lot. You'll get used to it." Well, I didn't want to get used to it. Later that evening, my next-door neighbor Michael Harrison stopped by to say hello. A tough-looking former military guy turned auto mechanic, Michael looked like he'd been through a few wars, figuratively and literally. I mentioned the incident with Deborah. His expression shifted instantly. "So, you've met our little local dictator," he said, leaning on the porch railing. "Word of advice: don't cross her." He went on to explain how Deborah used her HOA position like a personal weapon, enforcing rules however she pleased to punish anyone who stood up to her. My ex-wife couldn't take the harassment anymore after I challenged one of Deborah's bogus finds. That was the start of the end for our marriage. I asked why no one else pushed back. Michael explained that my home, sitting on a corner with limited visibility, was an easy target. And Deborah? She had a history of going after anyone who complained of flooding them with violations until they either paid up or moved out. That night, I installed high-quality security cameras, the ones with audio. I made sure every inch of my front yard was under surveillance. At least I'll have proof if this gets worse, I muttered while testing the motion detection settings. It did get worse. In the following 3 weeks, my cameras recorded Deborah driving across my lawn 8 times. Every pass made the damage worse. The grass died, the tracks got deeper, and the mess grew. I had replanted the lawn twice, only to watch my hard work be ruined again and again. Finally, I placed a modest little sign on the corner that read, "Please don't drive on the lawn." The next morning, my security footage captured Deborah pulling her car to a stop, stepping out, grabbing the Signa and walking it down the street to toss it in a public trash can. The following day, I opened my mailbox to find an official HOA violation notice. The reason? Lawn deterioration inconsistent with community standards. They'd slapped me with a $50 weekly fine until the issue was corrected. At the bottom of the notice, in dramatic cursive, was Deborah's signature, bold and proud, like someone who relished control. That evening, I sat on my front steps, staring out at my torn-up lawn, the violation letter crushed in my hand. The sight of the mangled grass brought back a flood of childhood memories, kneeling beside my father, learning to care for growing things, to treat them with patience and respect. "No one should get to destroy what we care about, Dad," I whispered. With a new fire in my chest, I pulled out the thick 78-page HOA rulebook and began reading it cover to cover, hunting for anything I could use to protect my land. I was deep into highlighting Section 4.3.2 on property owner rights when Michael knocked on my door, holding 2 cold beers and wearing a sly smile. "Got an idea," he said. "Ever heard of landscape obstacles?" Michael's suggestion was simple, yet ingenious. According to the HOA's own rulebook, specifically Section 5.9a, decorative boulders were allowed as long as they followed certain aesthetic guidelines. That weekend, we visited a local garden center and hand-picked 3 attractive stones that matched neighborhood standards. We positioned them carefully along the corner of my lawn, visually appealing and completely within regulation, but placed just right to prevent any car from taking a shortcut. "These aren't just rocks," Michael said as we carefully set the first one in place, a sleek granite piece with elegant blue-gray veins. "They're a message. You're establishing your boundary, and you're doing it by the book." We chose stones large enough to discourage vehicles, but small enough to look like legitimate lawn decor. At around $100 each, it wasn't cheap, but it felt like a solid investment to protect my property. We spent the day digging shallow spots for each boulder, embedding them securely in the soil. I took a ton of pictures throughout the process, before, during, and after. I measured distances from every sidewalk and boundary line. Michael even brought over the architectural guidelines to confirm we met all the required aesthetic rules for natural landscaping. "Document everything," he said. "Photos, dates, measurements. Deborah will look for any technicality to claim we broke a rule." It felt a bit paranoid at first, but it wouldn't for long. Not long after the rocks were installed, I spotted Deborah driving slowly past my home. Her lips were tight, her eyes narrowed. She couldn't officially complain, thought my boulders matched others in the neighborhood, including the decorative stone set up in her own front garden. But Deborah Thompson wasn't one to surrender. A few days later, I noticed one of the stones had shifted out of place and now bore fresh scratch marks. The footage revealed everything. In the early morning, Deborah had shown up with a crew of landscapers. She loudly announced they were there to offer complimentary lawn maintenance on behalf of the HOA. As the workers trimmed the grass, she directed them to access all areas for a clean queue, which, of course, meant moving the strategically placed boulders. "Classic Deborah," Michael muttered as we reviewed the footage. "Always leaves room for plausible deniability." The landscapers looked confused in the video, especially the one wearing the Green Dreams landscaping uniform. He hesitated when Deborah told him to push the boulder just a bit, but followed through it, probably assuming she had the authority to give orders. That's when I upgraded my security system again, adding motion-triggered floodlights all around the yard. Michael helped me install them, laughing as we tested the sensors. "You're climbing higher on her hit list now," he warned. "She keeps track." Trust me, he wasn't wrong. Soon after, an emergency home meeting was called. The agenda: a proposed amendment to the whole landscaping rules, limiting the size of outdoor decorative objects for safety reasons. I showed up at the meeting, and Deborah couldn't quite meet my eyes. She introduced the proposal, clearly hoping for an immediate vote to ban anything big enough to block a vehicle. When it was my turn to speak, I kept my tone calm and respectful as I showed clips of her repeated damage to my lawn. "I'm just trying to protect my property," I said plainly. I noticed a few heads nodding in agreement, including Amanda Williams, a lawyer and member of the HOA board. She suggested tabling the proposal for further review. Deborah was visibly annoyed. She'd expected her motion to pass on the spot. As the meeting wrapped up, Deborah stormed past me, brushing my shoulder with hers on the way out intentionally. Later that night, I received a text from an unknown number. It read, "In this neighborhood, we have ways of dealing with people who don't belong." I reported the message to the local police. They took my report but said that without an explicit threat, there wasn't much they could do. The next morning, I stepped outside and Frau's. All three of my decorative boulders were gone. My lawn, once in recovery, was now turned into wet, ugly mud. A large, official-looking HOA sign had been planted right in the center of the mess. "Area under repair and no trespassing." To make matters worse, someone had tampered with my security cameras, angling them away from the lawn and eliminating any footage of who was responsible. I immediately called Amanda for clarification. "The HOA didn't authorize any repair signs for your property," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Ryan Broken Bar, be careful. They're keeping tabs on all of us." The quiet urgency in her tone told me she knew more than she could safely share over the phone. I was outside taking photos of the damage when Deborah's pristine white Mercedes crept past. Her window rolled down, and she gave me a sugary smile. "Oh no, your yard's in awful shape," she said, mock concern dripping from her voice. "You might want to be careful about racking up more violations." I said nothing and just kept snapping pictures. My mother used to say, "Never wrestle with a pig. You'll both get dirty, but the pig will enjoy it." But something in me changed right then. I wasn't going to keep playing defense. I shifted into strategy mode. Over the next few days, I began documenting every shred of evidence. Every photo, every email, every recording went into a growing digital file. I created a thorough timeline starting from my very first encounter with Deborah, logging every incident, every conversation with precise notes and timestamps. I arranged the photographs to clearly show the progression of the damage, along with my repeated attempts to restore the lawn. Every notable quote captured by my cameras, especially the ones that revealed intent, was transcribed and categorized. The result was a thick, 3-inch binder labeled Property Dispute Evidence, which I locked inside a fireproof safe. It was an obsessive level of documentation, but one shaped by my background as a software engineer, where clarity and structure are everything. And more importantly, I was beginning to understand this wasn't a normal neighborly disagreement. This was war, and war required records. "Documentation is your sharpest weapon," Michael said as we sorted through the file together. "Deborah counts on people giving up. She thrives on exhaustion. Outlast her." With Michael's help, I prepared a formal complaint to the HOA's management company, the supposedly independent organization that oversees the board. We compiled timestamps, photographic evidence, and crystal-clear video clips showing Deborah trespassing on my property. The complaint included audio of her telling landscapers to move the decorative stones I had legally installed. Amanda quietly supported my efforts. She suggested the board investigate potential abuse of authority within the HOA. She later admitted that fear of retaliation had kept her silent for years, but this was too much. "I've seen this behavior before," she said, during a tense conversation in the grocery store parking lot. She kept glancing around, making sure no one was listening. "This isn't an isolated thing, it's a pattern." Robert Miller, a retired resident and longtime friend of Deborah's husband, emerged as the voice of opposition. He accused me of being overly dramatic and disrupting the peace of the community. An emergency home meeting was scheduled to review my complaint. The room was packed. Residents showed up in droves, eager to witness the standoff between the newcomer and the entrenched HOA president. When it was my turn to speak, I remained calm and precise. I presented my evidence one piece at a time. The room stirred when the footage played at Deborah, again and again, clearly violating the very rule she enforced on others. I noticed neighbors exchanging glances. Some whispered to each other, clearly taken aback. Amanda followed up with a detailed explanation of the bylaws that protected homeowner property rights. Despite all this, the board's decision was a letdown. They ruled that there wasn't enough evidence to definitively identify who had removed the decorative stones or damaged my lawn. The favoritism was obvious. Still, I wasn't giving up. Michael and I got to work installing an upgraded surveillance system. This time, the cameras were anchored directly into the siding of my house using commercial-grade mounts, far more secure and impossible to redirect without power tools. We even added decoy cameras in plain view to draw attention away from the hit-and-own, an old trick Michael learned in the military. Then we replanted the lawn again. But this time, we weren't alone. Several neighbors who had attended the meeting showed up to help. Quietly, without saying much, they worked beside us. They had seen enough. They were tired too. "This isn't just about your lawn anymore," Michael said as he raked the soil. "People are fed up with living under her control. They're just too scared to do anything." Deborah's retaliation didn't take long. Suddenly, I was flooded with fresh HOA violations, one citing the color of my front door, another for improper flower bed layout. Every violation notice that showed up in my mailbox was met with a precise, documented response. I followed the HOA handbook to the letter, photographing my compliance, logging every detail, yet the citations kept coming. One for a trash bin being visible half an hour after collection, another because I took down holiday decorations one day past the official removal window. Even an oil spota faint and temporary from a guest's parked car on my driveway earned me a warning. "This is her method," Michael said one evening while we reviewed the pile of notices. "It's death by 1,000 paper cuts. She'll keep this up until you give up or move out." I've watched her do it to 3 different families. I spoke to an attorney about whether I had a legal case for harassment. Technically, I did, but the cost of litigation ran into the thousands. It was a high price for what most people would dismiss as a petty neighborhood issue. Things took a dramatic turn one night when my motion sensors were triggered. The footage from my cameras showed Deborah's white Mercedes creeping across my freshly restored lawn again. But this time, something hidden beneath the grass caught one of her tires. Her car jolted. Within seconds, the tire deflated. The camera caught the moment she stepped out, fuming, staring at the damage. Then, reluctantly, she pulled out her phone to call for assistance. When I saw her stuck out there, part of me wanted to let her deal with it on her own. She had earned this. But I'd been raised differently. I grabbed my phone in the jacket and hit record as I walked outside. I told myself, I could ignore her right now, let her stew in her own mess. But I wasn't helping her because she deserved it. I was doing it because of who I was. "Car trouble?" I asked in a neutral tone as I approached. Her face was flushed with frustration. "Something punctured my tire. You must have buried something on purpose." Her voice was sharp and accusatory, clearly captured by my phone's mic. "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied, slowly turning my camera toward the deep tire tracks carved through my lawn. "But you are currently trespassing. This isn't a roadway. It's private property." "This is a public easement," she snapped, even though we both knew that wasn't true. "I'm going to sue you for damaging my vehicle." I gave her a calm smile. "If you'd like, I can call a tow truck for you. Also, you should know my security system records audio along with video. Everything you're saying is being saved." Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of unease crossing her face, though she quickly masked it with more venom. "You think you're smart," she hissed as the tow truck arrived. The driver loaded her car up as she glared at me. "You have no idea who you're messing with, Anderson," she growled under her breath. Still calm, I replied, "Actually, I do, Mrs. Thompson, and you should remember every word of this." Exchange is on tape. That flash of doubt in her eyes, it was worth every ounce of effort. I barely slept that night. My mind was buzzing with a thought I couldn't shake. If she wanted a path through my yard so badly, a broken bar, maybe I should give her one, but not the kind she expected. It was a strange idea, equal parts inspired and dangerous. I couldn't decide if it was justice or petty revenge. The line between the two blurred more with every passing hour. I dove into researching local property regulations and HOA policies. It was during that search that I found something fascinating, something that changed everything. There, in Section 7.2.1 of the county's building code, was a loophole. It allowed homeowners to install subsurface drainage systems under their lawns to protect their home's foundation. These systems could include metal drainage pipes, installed just below the surface. I kept digging or reading everything I could about Florida's drainage codes. With the high water table and the heavy rainfall, subsurface water management wasn't just allowed, it was encouraged. The code was clear. Homeowners were expected to implement effective water diversion systems to prevent flooding or structural damage. Even better, the law granted significant flexibility in how those drainage systems could be designed, provided the materials were appropriate for the soil and water flow in the area. Sitting at my kitchen table, sipping lukewarm coffee, I stared at the printed regulation. The idea forming in my head wasn't illegal. In fact, it was entirely within my rights. Boot a broken bar, was it right? Would this be crossing a line? That's where Michael found me, Latra still at the table, lost in thought, the regulation sheet in one hand and a pen in the other. You seem conflicted, Michael said, pulling out a chair beside me. I shared everything of the loophole I had found and the plan slowly taking shape in my head. But is it too extreme? I asked. I'd basically be creating a lawn that could flatten a tire if someone tried to drive over it. Michael paused, then replied thoughtfully, this isn't about booby-trapping your yard. It's about protecting it, legally. She has no business cutting across your property to begin with. His words helped me realign my focus. This wasn't revenge. This was about drawing clear boundaries, something Deborah had refused to acknowledge. Still, I spent days reflecting on the ethics. Was I becoming the kind of person I was standing up against? Someone using legal fine print to harm others. But the difference mattered. I wasn't going after anyone. I was reinforcing what already belonged to me. If there were consequences, they only existed because someone chose to cross the line. There's a vast difference between attacking and defending, and Deborah had given me no choice but to defend. Eventually, I brought in a contractor and experienced, no-nonsense guy named Frank who'd been working in the area for decades. He didn't need much context. As he looked over the tire-worn patch of grass at the corner of my lot, he gave a knowing grunt. Corner lots always get it the worst, he muttered. People think lawns are shortcuts. Together, we designed a fully compliant drainage system, one that served its stated purpose but with a secondary, very intentional outcome. He used corrosion-resistant stainless steel pipes installed just beneath the soil, particularly in the area Deborah always drove across. I submitted the official site plan, technical specs, and a foundation assessment to the HOA. Amanda, who had become increasingly vocal against Deborah's bullying, signed off on the documents without hesitation. Predictably, Deborah and Robert tried to intervene. They argued the system was unnecessary and would ruin the neighborhood's visual appeal. But Amanda stood firm. She reminded them loudly that the HOA guidelines and county regulations both explicitly allowed homeowners to install drainage systems to protect their foundations. With no valid grounds for objection, the installation moved forward. To comply with local codes, and to deliver a subtle message, I added small caution signs that read, "Subsurface drainage installed, not suitable for vehicle use." It was perfectly legal and perfectly pointed. While the work was underway, Amanda stopped by to verify everything was being done to code. As we walked the edge of my yard, she told me something that put things into even sharper perspective. Deborah's planning a run for city council, she said. She's been using her HOA role to make herself look like a protector of neighborhood standards. Amanda explained how Deborah had made a pattern of creating issues, then stepping in as the solution just to build a reputation. Most people are too scared or too tired to push back, she added. But not you. With my newfound understanding of the HOA rules, I started noticing things on Deborah's property. A fence 2 inches taller than allowed, lighting fixtures that hadn't been approved, landscaping spilling into shared spaces. Funny, no violation letters ever landed in her mailbox. When the drainage system was finally done, I reseeded the lawn, but at the corner where Deborah always crossed, I left a small patch that looked just enough like a path to tempt someone used to ignoring rules. It didn't take long. Just 3 days later, my security footage showed Deborah's Mercedes rolling toward that very spot. She stopped, hesitated and maybe reading the warning signal, then drove forward anyway. The grinding sound of steel scraping her tire was quickly followed by the unmistakable hiss of air escaping. Deborah launched out of her car, her face a mixture of shock and fury. She stormed toward my front door, hammering it with both fists while yelling accusations about how I had purposely set her up. I answered with my phone already recording. She demanded that I pay for her tire and threatened immediate legal consequences. Not long after, Officer Kevin Brown arrived at her request. Calmly, I presented everything: HOA-approved blueprints, documentation of the system, photos of the visible warning signs, and of course, video showing her driving on purpose across clearly marked private property. The officer reviewed all of it, saying nothing until he turned to her. "Ma'am, I don't see any violations here. Mr. Anderson's system is fully documented and legally approved. The signs are clearly visible, and this is private property and not a road. He engineered this to destroy my tire," Deborah shouted, her voice climbing. "My drainage system was installed to protect my home from water damage," I said coolly, "just as the law allows. I can't control who decides to drive across my yard even after being warned not to." The officer stayed professional, but I caught a tiny twitch at the corner of his mouth. Maybe it was just my imagination, but I could have sworn I saw the faintest smirk tug at the corner of Officer Brown's mouth. "I'm afraid there's no action I can take against Mr. Anderson based on what I've reviewed," he said evenly. "If you want to explore a civil case, that's your choice." Deborah spun on her heel and stomped back to her car, now resting on a deflated tire. She raised her voice deliberately, clearly addressing the entire neighborhood. "This isn't finished. You've made a huge mistake." That evening, a text popped up on my phone from Robert. "You've messed with the wrong person. You'll regret this." The message was threatening, yes, but more importantly, it revealed fear. They were losing their grip, and they knew it. Later that night, Michael knocked on my door. His face was tight with concern. "I just got off the phone with Robert's wife," he said grimly. "They're planning something about combing through your home purchase documents. They think they found something." My stomach dropped. When I'd bought the house, I didn't hire a private attorney. Instead, I'd used the in-house closing lawyer provided by the same real estate firm that had listed the property. And guess who the listing agent had been? Deborah Thompson. The following morning, I laid out every scrap of paperwork I could find from the home sale, covering my dining room table with nearly 200 pages of contracts, disclosures, and legal language I had signed without second thought. I remembered the excitement of that day, how I'd rushed through signatures, barely skimming the pages as the closing attorney pointed to where I needed to initial. That attorney, of course, had been recommended by Deborah's firm. Now, that oversight could come back to bite me. Fortunately, my background in software engineering came in handy. I created a digital database of the documents, scanning every page, converting them into searchable text using OCR, and organizing them into a structured index. Despite the rising anxiety, the methodical process helped me stay focused. And then I found it, buried at the very end of Appendix C, written in a font so small it practically required a magnifying glass, was a clause I had completely missed. Seller reserves perpetual access and transition rights along established pathways for community connectivity purposes. I read it again, and again. The wording was masterfully vague yet deliberately murky, enough to potentially hold up, but not nearly transparent enough for any buyer to notice without legal help. In that moment, it all clicked. I had gone through the exact funnel Deborah wanted buyers to go through: a standard paperwork, her suggested attorney, and her title company. In my eagerness to seal the deal on a dream home, I had unknowingly given up part of my own yard. I couldn't help but wonder how many others had fallen into the same trap. Had Deborah manipulated her role as agent to insert similar clauses across the neighborhood? quietly ensuring long-term control. I immediately reached out to Amanda, who put me in touch with a veteran property attorney named Patricia. Patricia showed up the very next morning, dressed in a sharp navy suit and carrying a worn leather briefcase that screamed experience. She wasted no time diving into the documents. After combing through the papers, she gave a firm nod. "This clause isn't legally binding," she said. "It's improperly formatted, buried in an appendix, and never directly presented or agreed upon in the final contract. It's intentionally vague and not enforceable." She explained how some unethical agents use this strategy at embedding sketchy language in obscure parts of contracts to gain leverage after the fact. "I've seen this before," she added, tapping the clause with her pen. "It rides the line between shady and illegal." Deborah could try to argue that the tire tracks on your lawn count as an established pathway, but no judge would uphold that. It contradicts your state property rights and wasn't transparently disclosed. The deeper issue, we discovered this wasn't isolated. The same clause or subtle variations of it showed up in multiple other home contracts in the neighborhood, all processed through Deborah's real estate agency. It was a pattern, a strategy. She had engineered a mechanism to hold influence over homes she no longer even owned. Before I had time to fully plan my next steps, Deborah called for an emergency home meeting, citing my so-called disruptive conduct. The notice listed hazardous landscaping choices and aggressive behavior toward HOA representatives as agenda items. I didn't go alone. Patricia came with me. As we walked into the community center, I noticed Deborah's eyebrows shoot up at the sight of a professional attorney at my side. Residents filled the room, most curious, some skeptical. Deborah opened the meeting with her usual flair for dramatics, trying to position herself as the protector of neighborhood order. "Mr. Anderson has repeatedly disregarded long-standing community norms," she declared, gesturing for emphasis like she was addressing a courtroom instead of her neighbors. Deborah stood at the front of the room, voice rising in staged indignation. "His most recent behavior, embedding dangerous metal spikes beneath his lawn, is an intentional threat to others and clearly violates the community's values," she declared, gesturing dramatically. When it was my turn to speak, I calmly stepped forward and began laying out the evidence I had gathered. "Mrs. Thompson has been inserting illegal and unenforceable access clauses into home deeds," I explained, holding up large printed copies of the documents. "She's used her dual roles as HOA president and real estate agent to exert power over properties she no longer owns." A ripple of concern spread through the crowd. People began checking their own contracts, many discovering that the same ambiguous clause had been quietly added to their documents. Amanda took the floor next. She presented a concise overview of state real estate law, highlighting how these kinds of hidden clauses directly violated Florida regulations. Robert tried to jump to Deborah's defense, arguing that these clauses were standard practice meant to promote neighborhood unity. But Michael wasn't having it. "Let's not forget the fence incident," Michael said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Deborah used the same tactics to force me to move my fence last year. Cost me a fortune. This isn't about unity or community guidelines," he continued, his military demeanor commanding attention. "This is about one person bending the rules to benefit herself and punishing anyone who stands up to her." The meeting erupted into chaos. One after another, residents shared their own stories, some about threats, others about selective enforcement of rules. Deborah tried repeatedly to restore order, but the momentum had shifted. Several board members openly called for a no-confidence vote against her. That evening, driving home, I felt a strange blend of satisfaction and apprehension. We had exposed the truth, but I knew Deborah would accept defeat quietly. And I was right. Around 2 a.m., my home security system pinged me awake. I checked the footage. Several shadowy figures crept toward my house, carrying what looked like spray cans and tools. I immediately dialed the police and activated my exterior floodlights. The intruders scattered into the night. The next morning, I found the words "HOA hater" half-sprayed onto the side of my car. They hadn't finished the job before fleeing. Officer Brown came out, documented the scene, and filed the report, but with no clear identification on the footage. He admitted it was unlikely they'd be caught. While I was scrubbing the paint off my car, Amanda called. "Deborah's not done," she warned. She convinced the HOA executive team to conduct a full inspection of your property next week. They're planning to fine you for every small thing they can find. She's telling people she'll force you to sell. That evening, I sat on my porch, staring at the vandalized car. I felt drained. I began to wonder, was it worth it? Should I just cut my losses and leave? Michael came by and sat beside me. He placed a firm hand on my shoulder. You can't walk away now, Ryan, he said. This isn't just about you anymore. If she wins this battle and ends up on city council, she'll spread this same abuse of power to the whole town. We need to get ahead of her. Then he pulled out his phone and showed me a social media page titled, Victims of Thompson HOA Share Your Story. The group already had dozens of members and neighbors past and present, all describing similar harassment and power games. Over the next week, we poured our energy into building up the page, encouraging anonymous posts and compiling stories from others who had been affected. The response was explosive, not just from our community, but from people in 2 previous neighborhoods where Deborah had been HOA president. Amanda helped quietly behind the scenes. She shared internal HOA evidence of rule bending and questionable bookkeeping during Deborah's tenure. There were unexplained gaps in budget reports, unexplained transfers, and missing meeting minutes. I've kept these records for years, Amanda admitted. I just never felt safe going public alone. I've seen what happens to people who challenge her. As the inspection date crept closer, Michael and I organized a quiet community gathering to talk about the future. We hosted it in his backyard, a neutral territory. Invitations were passed around quietly, through hushed conversations and encrypted messages. Deborah found out about the group almost immediately. A few days before the meeting, I received a certified letter from her attorney. The language was polished and formal, threatening legal action for defamation and slander. They demanded that I shut down the page and issue a public apology for making false and damaging statements. My own lawyer reviewed the letter, a broken bar. My lawyer responded promptly, stating that all statements made were based on factual experiences and protected under free speech laws. Every claim had documented evidence to back it up. As the legal back and forth intensified, it became clear this wasn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. The implications could affect reputations and Deborah's real estate license. Meanwhile, Robert and a few of Deborah's most loyal followers began surveilling my property. They took photos constantly. A garden hose left out a little too long, a newspaper on my porch, a hedge that hadn't been trimmed that week. It was pure psychological warfare, meant to wear me down. With the inspection approaching fast, we pushed our plans forward. I reached out to several local journalists, pitching a story on HOA abuse and conflicts of interest involving real estate dealings. 2 reporters showed interest, especially after I revealed evidence of hidden deed clauses and selective enforcement tactics. Amanda warned me that Deborah was preparing a case to push for a forced sale of my home, claiming repeated and serious violations disqualified me from continued residence. That explained the obsessive documentation. The day of the inspection arrived, and Deborah showed up flanked by a 5-person team, including Robert and a private building inspector she had hired. She cited structural safety concerns curiously, none of which were brought up when I bought the house just 6 months prior. The inspection was relentless. They documented everything: a loose gutter bolt, fading paint on the trim, a tiny crack in one sidewalk tile. The inspector looked uneasy at times but kept going, no doubt aware of Deborah's expectations. Then, chaos struck in the best way possible. 2 news vans pulled up, reporters and cameramen jumping out to film what had turned into a spectacle. Deborah visibly stiffened, clearly caught off guard by the media attention. One investigative journalist approached the inspector and began asking sharp questions about his relationship with Deborah's company. The man grew visibly uncomfortable, offering vague, dodgy answers. The journalist revealed that she had uncovered past payments made to the inspector by businesses connected to Deborah's real estate ventures. At that moment, I played my final card. Michael had managed to attend one of the pre-inspection meetings, posing as a neutral neighbor. During that meeting, he secretly recorded Robert instructing the inspector, "Find something or anything to justify removing Anderson from this neighborhood." I played the recording out loud. Now under direct scrutiny and ethical pressure, the inspector refused to sign off on Deborah's biased, punitive report. But despite his refusal, I received a letter the next day, a $5,000 fine and a 10-day deadline to correct all violations or face potential eviction. I held the notice in my hands, feeling as though my entire homeownership journey was crashing down, but as I looked up, I saw Michael standing firm beside me, Amanda nodding with determination, and nearly 20 neighbors gathered in silent support. "Ready for that community meeting now?" Michael asked. I nodded. This was the moment we had been building toward. That evening, while preparing my presentation, a message popped up from an unknown number. "I'm Deborah's assistant. She has more dirt on you than you think. Meet me tomorrow at 8 a.m. at downtown coffee shop." The cafe copyright was bustling with commuters the next morning when I arrived. A woman, Jessica, was already waiting, checking her watch nervously. "I've worked for Deborah for 3 years," she said in a hushed voice. "What she's doing to you she's done to others. A lot of them." She slid a flash drive across the table. "This has everything. Emails, spreadsheets of proof that she's been manipulating HOA rules to devalue homes, then buying them up through shell companies." According to the files, Deborah had created a system targeting specific types of properties: corner lots, elderly homeowners ready to downsize, or families under financial stress. She'd hit them with violations, drag out the process, and eventually drive them to sell. Her real estate firm would then step in to buy those properties at a discount, often under the name of LLCs tied to her husband or business associates. "She already has a buyer lined up for your place," Jessica warned. "They're offering $30,000 more than what you paid. The drainage issue on your property is making her desperate. You're the first one fighting back this hard, and she's making mistakes." Armed with this bombshell, I headed to Michael's house for the community meeting that night. Over 40 residents showed up, along with the local reporters who had covered the inspection. Amanda, who had previously worked quietly in the background, now came forward publicly. She knew the risks to her professional standing but refused to stay silent any longer. Deborah and Robert barged in halfway through the meeting, attempting to shut it down by claiming it violated HOA regulations, but no one paid them any attention this time. With confidence, I presented the entire case step by step. I revealed Jessica's files, detailing the long-standing manipulation of HOA rules, harassment tactics, and Deborah's shady property acquisitions. Spreadsheets revealed profits from dozens of underhanded property sales. The room fell into stunned silence as gasps echoed around. Former victims began sharing their experience as families who'd lost tens of thousands in hasty, pressured sales. Elderly residents admitted they'd been bullied into letting go of homes they'd lived in for decades. Newcomers told stories of being driven out before they could even settle in. Robert, clearly rattled by the overwhelming evidence, suddenly stepped away from Deborah's side. "I didn't know about the property flipping," he confessed, his voice shaky. "She told me we were just enforcing neighborhood standards." He admitted Deborah had promised him a future political role via support for a seat on her upcoming council team if he helped enforce her harsh HOA agenda. Deborah, attempting to salvage control, denied everything. She threatened to sue everyone present for defamation, but the confident, commanding presence she was known for had faded. Her eyes darted nervously as supporters around the room gradually backed away. Local journalists began firing questions, inquiries into her real estate dealings, her connections with city officials, irregularities in tax filings for her shell companies, and the ethical dilemma of acting as both HOA president and the area's leading real estate agent. Amanda stepped up with her own findings from an internal audit. She pointed out strange financial activity and several suspicious transactions within the HOA budget during Deborah's tenure. "These discrepancies add up to more than $30,000 in just 2 years, Amanda explained, handing out copies to the reporters. Just as the tension reached its peak, Officer Brown entered the room. "I've received multiple formal complaints," he announced. "I'll need statements from those involved. The allegations include fraud, harassment, and misuse of HOA funds." Deborah tried to excuse herself. "I need to speak with my attorney," she said, making for the door. "I'll need your statement now, Mrs. Thompson," Officer Brown replied firmly. "These are serious matters requiring immediate attention." Cornered and unraveling, Deborah lost the grip she held so tightly. "I built this neighborhood," she shouted, voice trembling. "None of you ever did anything when I was in charge. You're all ungrateful." Her tirade was caught on multiple cell phones as a one final blow to her reputation. The HOA members quickly held a vote. Deborah was removed from her position by a landslide. Robert didn't vote out, his face full of guilt and relief. In the months that followed, Amanda was elected as interim HOA president. She quickly introduced new transparency rules and eliminated the most excessive, unfair regulations. Deborah was now under investigation by both local authorities and the real estate board for her unethical business conduct. All fines against me were dropped, and the HOA approved reimbursement for the damage to my lawn and the ongoing harassment. To celebrate, the neighborhood threw a block-wide barbecue we hosted on my fully restored lawn. The highlight, a sign proudly stuck into the grass: HOA approved lawn, may or may not include spikes. During the celebration, Robert walked up to me, sincerely apologetic. "I let myself get used," he admitted. "I'm selling the house, moving closer to my daughter. Maybe it's time to start fresh." A few weeks later, I sat peacefully on my porch as the sun dipped below the trees. The light glowed across my thriving lawn. Deborah's white Mercedes drove past one last time, filled with moving boxes. She was finally leaving for good. Michael joined me on the porch with a beer in one hand and an official document in the other. "She's withdrawn from the city council race," he said with a grin. "You know," he continued, "I think we should propose a new HOA regulation. Let's rename the corner near your house to a Broken Bar, a Karen's Folly Lane." I laughed and raised my bottle. To well-kept lawns and peaceful neighborhoods, two things no Karen can take away. Later that week, Amanda stopped by holding a campaign flyer from Deborah's new neighborhood across town. "Should we give them a heads up?" she joked. I smiled. "Hopefully they learn to install drainage spikes faster than we did." And that, my friends, is how a lawn war turned into a Lesotho hard-earned win against an HOA Karen. Deborah now lives in a rented apartment in another city without a yard to trample or torment. I removed most of the drainage spikes after the dust settled, leaving just a small row. Technically, they were proper drainage tills, a broken bar, all in line with HOA rules. Amanda's leadership transformed our HOA from a weapon into a guide, a genuine effort to build a community, not control one. And if any Karens out there are watching, thinking of turning their HOA into a personal empire, remember this: sometimes, the quietest lawns have the sharpest spikes. This is Ryan Anderson, the guy who turned a Karen's lawn into a lasting lesson. Drop a comment below if you've had your own HOA Karen experience. I know I'm not alone.